On that fateful evening, the cry of a woman in pain echoed across a small village in the Kingdom of Zaminda. The villagers could hear the helpless cry of a woman screaming for the ancient gods to come and help her. They all knew where this cry was coming from, but no one approached the hut. They all ignored the screams. No one cared. People returning from the market also ignored the noise coming from the hut. They just passed by, completely focused on their own business. The reason for this was that the villagers recognized that particular hut. It was a usual sound they were familiar with because the building belonged to a very well-known midwife in the village. A woman was in labor, pushing out a child for the first time in her life. Kia held the two other women by their wrappers, screaming as the midwife squatted between her spread legs. By midnight, a baby finally came out. But there was no cry. The room went completely silent. This was a highly unusual occurrence, as newborn infants are meant to cry the exact moment they come into the world. But this was a different case. This ancient tribe deeply believed that if a newborn child refuses to cry after being birthed, the child must be possessed by an evil spirit. Though in this specific case, they were not totally wrong. The midwife continued to tap the baby on the back, but the infant refused to cry. She raised the child up and shook her, but still nothing happened. The baby's eyes were just slightly open, staring directly at the midwife, which was also highly unusual. The midwife panicked and decided to go and consult a priestess, who would be the only one capable of interpreting the situation. Kia had fallen completely asleep after giving birth. The midwife laid the child next to the sleeping mother, but as she was about to let go of the baby, something terrifying happened. The infant grabbed the midwife by one of her fingers and twisted it with an unnatural strength for a newborn, completely breaking her finger. She screamed and ran out of the hut in a pure panic. It was the early hours of the morning, and the roosters were just beginning to crow. When she got to the priestess's house, she explained the whole incident to her. The priestess shouted out loud that an abomination had been born. "That child must be a demon," she said. Both women immediately returned to the hut as the day was breaking, heading to where Kia and her little infant were. When the midwife and the priestess arrived, Kia was now awake, peacefully breastfeeding her baby. The expressions on the two women who just entered the hut were deeply troubled. The midwife was in a panic, while the priestess's expression was full of dark questions. Standing before the mother, the midwife explained exactly what she had witnessed. But Kia was thrown into a state of total confusion because she didn't believe what the midwife had just said. She explained that it was actually the cry of the baby that had woken her up, and she had been breastfeeding her child without noticing any unusual behavior. The priestess decided to see for herself. She took the infant, tapping the child hard on the back, but the baby refused to cry. She tried again, but still absolutely nothing happened. She panicked, completely confirming the claims of the midwife. She dropped the infant back into the mother's arms and made a heavy declaration. The priestess stated the child had to be cleansed because she possessed a demon inside of her. This cleansing ritual was a very brutal process where cruel marks would be carved into the infant's skin, leaving scars all over her body, scars that would never clear from her skin throughout her entire lifetime. Kia completely refused to surrender her child to such a cruel act, standing strongly by her words that absolutely nothing was wrong with her baby. The situation brought about heavy arguments between the women. They quarreled loudly with the mother, and this argument made the villagers gather around the hut. The matter eventually reached the chief of the village. After the situation was debated among the elders, they came to a final conclusion. If the mother refused to surrender her child for cleansing, she and her cursed child would be permanently banished from the village. Kia was a woman who looked soft on the outside, but on the inside, she was incredibly strong. Standing before the elders and the villagers, she chose her child over the village. She left the elders' chamber crying, carrying her infant tightly in her arms. She was accompanied by a few of the villagers who kept telling her she was making things far too hard for herself. She didn't listen to what anyone had to say. She gathered a few belongings and left the village that very morning without ever looking back. 10 full moons ago, Kia had met a stranger by the hill stream one afternoon while she went to fetch water. He was a handsome-looking man, He introduced himself as a hunter from the village of Kumba, located far away from Kia's home. The stranger claimed he had been tracking game, which had eventually led him to her village. They had a great time together, laughing and sharing their life stories. Just within that short moment, a strong bond connected their souls. The strange hunter, by the name of Dimba, didn't go back that same day. He stayed for the night, claiming he would like to spend more time in the village before returning. As time went on, it was as if he no longer cared for the animal he claimed to be tracking. Now he had actively begun to track Kia. Kia was a young, beautiful lady. Many men in the village constantly wanted her hand in marriage, but she kept turning down their offers with reasons that didn't seem to make any sense. Now, she had fallen deeply in love with this stranger, Dimba. They both spent more of their time under a mango tree at night, and on many occasions, they laid in each other's arms. Dimba occupied an abandoned hut in the village, sleeping there by night until the day it finally happened. Kia became pregnant. When she noticed the pregnancy on that evening, she quickly went to the abandoned hut to see Dimba and let him know what was happening. But when she got there, absolutely nobody was around. She waited until night came, but still nobody showed up. She also went back to their normal spot under the mango tree, but there was no sign of him. When it was already late and the darkness was heavy, she went back to her house alone. She was an orphan. Her parents had left the world when she was still a teenager. That night, she prayed to see Dimba by the next day, but when the next morning arrived, there was no sign of him. 7 days passed, then one full moon, then another and another, still no sign of Dimba. He had left her just like that. No goodbye, absolutely nothing. She was deeply confused, but still, she forced herself to move on with her life. Even though life was incredibly hard on her, she kept going, completely ignoring the villagers who mocked her and said a lot of terrible things behind her back. Now, those exact same villagers wanted to tell her that her own blood was cursed. She refused their judgment and chose herself instead. The journey was long, but by evening, Kia finally arrived at the village of Kumba with deep hopes that somehow she would get to see Dimba again. But unfortunately for her, everyone in the village she asked about Dimba always told her the exact same thing. They didn't know who she was describing. Of all the men who bore that name in the village, absolutely none of them was her Dimba. Kia settled down in the village of Kumba. Life wasn't easy for her and her new baby. The man she had loved, the father of her child, was nowhere to be found. The worst part was knowing he had lied to her, or perhaps no one even knew where he truly came from. She named her child Zulmira. As the girl grew up, it became very clear that Zulmira was entirely different from every other teenager in the kingdom. She possessed the broad, heavy physique of a boy and was massive in size. The villagers often whispered that she was a male who had come into the world trapped in a female's body. Years passed and a lot happened. After 4 years of struggling in Kumba, Kia got married to a kind young man in the kingdom who warmly accepted both her and her unusual child. A year later, Kia took in seed and bore a son for the man, naming him Dako. The bond between the young boy and Zulmira was incredibly strong, and this protective nature made it even clearer to others just how different she was. If anyone looked for her brother's trouble or tried to bully him, no matter the person's size, Zulmira took it upon herself to retaliate heavily. On one particular occasion, her young brother Dako was returning from an errand when a village boy, accompanied by a group of older teenagers, blocked his path. They pushed young Dako around, laughing and mocking him for being weak and constantly running back to his big sister for help. This deeply upset Dako. He tried to prove himself as a man by fighting back, but it didn't turn out well for him. That hot afternoon, he received the greatest beating of his life. His mouth was bleeding heavily, and his clothes were torn as he returned home to his mother and sister. Seeing his battered face, Zulmira suddenly surged with intense rage. Before Kia could even attempt to stop her daughter, Zulmira dashed out of the hut, consumed by blind anger. The young teenage boys were relaxing and playing under a massive, ancient tree by the edge of the village's main road. When they looked up, they saw her approaching. It was Zulmira, and her entire face and physical expression radiated pure, terrifying rage. The boys were in a large group and were far bigger in size than she was, but she didn't care at all. When she reached them, they laughed in her face, mocking her that she had now come to retaliate for her little puppet of a brother. This only deepened her fury. They laughed loudly, but soon, that laugh caught tightly in their throats. What happened next taught the boys a violent lesson that she wasn't ordinary, and everyone quickly learned to stay entirely out of her path. Zulmira left an unspeakable, bloody scene behind in the dirt and calmly walked back to her mother's house as if nothing had happened at all. That same evening, the furious parents of the wounded and beaten boys brought their children to Kia's hut to show her exactly what her daughter had done to their sons. But Kia, in response, firmly presented her own disfigured, bleeding son before the angry mothers. As the argument heated up in the center of the compound, only one person stood victorious and completely untouched. It wasn't a male. All the male teenagers involved were badly bruised and affected. Among the angry crowd stood one young girl, perfectly unharmed and quiet. She became the girl that everyone in Kumba learned to fear, Zulmira. Zulmira grew into a fearless young woman. She was incredibly strong, huge in size, and maintained the heavy, muscular physique of a hardened man. She naturally indulged in heavy labor and activities that only grown men engaged in. She even performed far better at these tasks than the strongest men in the village. At first, she worked shaping heavy iron in a local blacksmith shop. Later, when the massive Kingdom of Zaminda began recruiting new warriors, she boldly applied to join the royal army. At first, the other male soldiers mocked her heavily, including the high captain of the kingdom's army. The captain challenged her, stating that if she could just beat the junior recruit soldiers in the squad, she would be accepted. But Zulmira coldly warned the captain that even the very best among his young recruits was not her match. The captain insisted that she fight a raw, bare-fisted combat match with the best men among the recruits. She accepted, and the fight began in the center of the training grounds. It lasted only a few short seconds. As the young, muscular man aggressively launched a heavy blow at Zulmira, she effortlessly ducked beneath his arm. She instantly delivered a devastating uppercut directly to the young man's jaw, lifting his entire body off the ground before he landed heavily on the dirt floor, completely unconscious. Everyone stood in stunned shock, including the captain. How did she do that? That was the burning question on everyone's mind. Without breaking a sweat, she turned and challenged the captain's elite soldiers to a raw, brutal fist combat. Witnessing what had just happened, the captain accepted the challenge because he didn't want his finest soldiers humiliated by fear. As the fight began, it became violently clear that even the strongest elite soldier wasn't her match, because just like the young recruit, the elite warrior met the exact same humiliating fate. The elite warrior raged, throwing a flurry of heavy punches that were carefully and smoothly dodged by Zulmira. The most terrifying part was when a solid punch finally landed directly on her arm. It had zero effect on her. Instead, the elite warrior violently grabbed his own hand, reacting exactly as if he had just punched a solid bag of stones. The fight lasted less than a few minutes before the elite warrior lay completely defeated in the dust, screaming in pain from his shattered knuckles. This brutal display made it undeniable that she wasn't ordinary. The challenge kept going as two. Then 3 elite soldiers faced her at once in a desperate attack, but just like the others, they all met a swift, crushing defeat. The captain immediately accepted her into the army without forcing her to undergo any basic training. Later, when the captain reported directly to the king about Zulmira, he specifically mentioned that she didn't need any training at all. In fact, the royal elite warriors needed to learn directly from her. Her incredible story quickly spread like wildfire across the whole kingdom. A legendary woman who was vastly stronger than any man in the land. The Kingdom of Zaminda soon faced a terror unlike anything they had ever encountered. A dark invasion marched out from the deep, forbidden valleys. These were no ordinary rival soldiers fighting for land. They were a corrupted army. They painted their faces with thick white ash, wore masks carved from animal bones, and relied on dark, ancient magic to strike freezing fear into the hearts of normal men. The king of Zaminda immediately sent his best elite soldiers to the kingdom's borders to hold the front line. Because of her unmatched, towering strength, Zulmira was stationed right at the very front. The same male soldiers who had once mocked her heavy physique now looked directly up to her for protection and courage. When the men stood behind her massive frame, their fear of the corrupted army began to fade. One cold morning, Zulmira and her elite squad were patrolling the dense, misty edge of the border forest. Without any warning, the corrupted warriors launched a sudden ambush. They dropped from the thick trees and charged out of the heavy fog, attacking with unnatural speed and heavy iron weapons. The regular Zaminda soldiers were quickly overwhelmed by the sheer ferocity of the attack. Zulmira watched as the young men she trained with were pushed back, injured, and thrown to the dirt by the dark forces. Seeing the deep arrogance of the corrupted enemy striking down her people triggered something profound inside her. The ancient, dormant fury she had carried since childhood sparked to life. Her blood began to boil, and her heartbeat echoed in her own ears like heavy war drums. Zulmira completely abandoned standard military tactics. Driven entirely by raw, unfiltered rage, she dropped her heavy wooden shield into the dirt. She did not need it. With a deafening roar that shook the misty leaves, she charged barehanded directly into the center of the enemy forces. The corrupted warriors quickly realized they had made a fatal mistake. An enemy soldier thrust a heavy iron spear directly at her chest, expecting her to fall. Instead, Zulmira caught the thick wooden shaft in midair, snapping it like a dry twig. The emotional tension on the battlefield shifted from the Zaminda soldiers to the invaders. Zulmira moved like a walking earthquake. When multiple enemies tried to surround her, she slammed her heavy fists directly into the ground, creating a massive shockwave that threw the armored men off their feet. She did not rely on brutal butchery. Her sheer, unbreakable presence was enough to shatter their minds. Heavy iron weapons bounced harmlessly off her hardened skin. She effortlessly lifted grown men by their armor and tossed them aside, clearing the path with terrifying ease. The corrupted army, trained to inflict terror, suddenly found themselves backing away in pure, unexplainable fear. They were no longer fighting a human woman. They were trying to survive a natural disaster fueled by deep, raging anger. Seeing his elite forces crumbling in fear, the leader of the corrupted army stepped forward. He was a massive, terrifying warlord wielding a heavy, spiked club. He roared a challenge and swung his weapon with earth-shattering force directly at Zulmira. Zulmira did not dodge. She stepped directly into his space and caught the heavy iron club with her bare hands. The impact sent a heavy gust of wind through the forest, but Zulmira's feet remained firmly planted in the dirt. The warlord's eyes widened in profound shock. He struggled with all his might, but he could not move his weapon an inch from her crushing grip. As they stood locked in this tense standoff, the warlord looked closely into Zulmira's furious, blazing eyes. He studied her heavy, towering physique and the raw, undeniable power radiating from her skin. Slowly, his shock turned into a dark, knowing smile. He laughed, a deep, raspy sound that cut through the tension of the battlefield. Leaning in close, the warlord spoke a single sentence that froze the raging blood in Zulmira's veins. He whispered, "You fight with the exact same fury as the man who trained us in the dark valleys, Dimba." The misty ambush ended in total victory for Zaminda. Zulmira and her elite squad completely routed the corrupted army, but she made sure to keep the massive warlord alive. He was heavily bound in iron chains and dragged back to the deep dungeons of the kingdom. Growing up as a confused teenager, Zulmira had often asked her mother about the man who gave her life. Kia had shared the story of the handsome hunter by the stream and his sudden, unexplained disappearance. Now, hearing that same name from the mouth of a dark enemy ignited a furious fire in Zulmira's chest. She descended into the dark dungeon, demanding the truth. Through brutal, relentless interrogation, she finally broke the warlord's spirit. He confessed the exact location where the legendary warrior wandered, the desolate, unforgiving Highland Passes. Driven by a profound need for answers, Zulmira temporarily left her post in the royal army. She set out entirely alone, following the rough tracking descriptions forcefully obtained from the enemy. The journey was deeply treacherous. She scaled steep, jagged cliffs and pushed through blistering desert winds. Ordinary travelers would have perished, but her hardened, unbreakable physique easily endured the harsh elements. After weeks of relentless tracking, she finally spotted her target. Walking alone on a deserted, dusty mountain road was a towering, heavily weathered man. His hair was streaked with gray, but his massive frame radiated a dangerous, wild energy. It was Dimba. Zulmira silently stepped out from the rocky shadows, completely blocking his path. She held a heavy iron sword in her right hand. Dimba stopped in his tracks. Seeing a massive, muscular woman blocking his way, he assumed the Dark Valleys had simply sent another highly skilled assassin to claim his head. Dimba let out a deep battle grunt and charged forward with terrifying speed. But as he closed the distance, Zulmira did something completely unexpected. She calmly tossed her heavy iron sword into the dirt, raising her bare fists in a raw fighting stance. They clashed like two massive boulders colliding. Dimba launched a devastating right hook aimed directly at her jaw. Zulmira smoothly ducked beneath the heavy arm and drove a crushing punch straight into his ribs. The impact echoed like a falling tree, but Dimba did not fall. He only grunted, instantly retaliating with a sweeping leg strike. Zulmira caught his heavy leg with her bare forearm, and the sheer force of the block violently cracked the solid ground beneath her boots. They traded earth-shattering blows, tearing up the dusty road. Dimba delivered a heavy strike to her shoulder, but she did not even flinch. She countered with a fierce uppercut that forced the giant man to slide backward in the dirt. As the brutal fight proceeded, Dimba realized with deep shock that this young woman possessed his exact same unnatural durability, but her strength was fiercely superior. Breathing heavily, they stepped in close, violently locking their massive hands together in a raw test of power. Their muscles bulged, and the rocky dirt shifted beneath their feet as neither warrior refused to yield an inch. Straining against her unbelievable strength, Dimba stared into her raging eyes. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice thick with confusion and exhaustion. Zulmira's intense fury slowly melted into profound, unspoken sorrow. She locked eyes with him and spoke clearly, "I am your daughter." The words struck Dimba harder than any physical blow. He froze entirely. Looking closer, he saw past her hardened, warrior exterior and recognized Kia's gentle, familiar features hidden behind the pain in her eyes. He saw his own cursed blood running through her veins. The fight instantly drained from his body. Dimba released her hands and collapsed heavily onto his knees in the dust, totally overcome by shock and deep regret. Tears washed through the dirt on Dimba's weathered face as he begged his daughter for forgiveness. He finally revealed the tragic, hidden reason for his disappearance all those years ago. His bloodline carried a volatile, uncontrollable fury. When he discovered Kia was pregnant, he realized the dark sorcerers from the Forbidden Valleys had finally tracked him down, aiming to capture him and drain his powerful blood. Knowing that staying would bring endless destruction to Kumba and guarantee the death of the woman he loved, he chose to abandon the hut in the middle of the night. He led the corrupted assassins far away into the deep mountains, sacrificing his own happiness to live a lonely life in exile, protecting Kia from the shadows. He never knew his daughter had survived and inherited his immense, impossible power. Understanding his heavy sacrifice, Zulmira forgave him. Together, they made the long journey back to the village of Kumba. When they arrived at the family compound, Kia, now much older, with beautiful silver threads in her hair, stepped out of her hut. She dropped her woven basket in pure disbelief. She could not express her overwhelming joy at seeing the man she once deeply loved standing before her again. They shared a highly emotional, tearful reunion under each other's embrace. However, as Dimba watched Kia interact with her kind husband and her younger son, Dako, a bittersweet realization settled in his heart. They were a happy, peaceful family now. His presence would only disrupt the beautiful life she had managed to build. Knowing his ultimate sacrifice had truly kept them safe, Dimba smiled softly. He shared a final, loving embrace with his daughter and said his permanent goodbyes to Kia. He turned and walked away into the horizon, finally carrying a healed heart. Zulmira returned to her rightful place in the Kingdom of Zaminda, no longer carrying the heavy weight of her past. She stood taller and fought with a clear, focused mind. From that day forward, the kingdom thrived in total peace. Every neighboring ruler and faraway warlord learned to deeply fear the borders of Zaminda, knowing the land was forever protected by the legendary, unbreakable warrior woman who possessed the strength of an entire army. Today, the modern world knows her as a towering, green-skinned superhero, smashing her way through city streets and comic book pages. We are told she is just a fictional creation born from radiation and modern science. But long before Hollywood cameras rolled and comic book ink dried, there was a completely different kind of titan walking the earth. A woman whose bare fists shattered solid iron, whose unyielding physique terrified warlords, and whose raw, unfiltered strength protected the massive kingdom of Zaminda. Looking at the undeniable similarities, you have to ask yourself, did modern writers truly invent this character from scratch, or did they simply repackage a forgotten, hidden piece of history? Is the modern-day She-Hulk actually just a watered-down myth of Zulmira, the real, unstoppable African warrior queen?